I was 29 when I got married to Adam, who was 30, and for the first 3 years, I believed we had a wonderful life together. We had been high school sweethearts, each other's first everything, and I truly thought we would grow old together. We had two beautiful boys, age 4 and 5 now, and we're planning to buy a house so we could finally move out of the small apartment we'd lived in since getting married. Our lives seemed perfect, or so I thought. Out of nowhere, Adam dropped a bombshell on me. He sat me down one day and said he wanted to be single. He claimed he wasn't happy in our marriage and wanted to explore the world. At first, I thought it was a joke, but the seriousness in his tone made it clear that he had given this a lot of thought. He talked about how we'd been together since high school, how we were each other's first everything, and how he felt like he needed more from life. He even said he still loved me, but insisted he loved himself too much to stay in a situation where he didn't feel fulfilled. His words were a mix of idealistic nonsense and selfishness. He described our marriage and family as a burden that was holding us back from living our best lives. He suggested that we both needed freedom to explore and grow. It sounded ridiculous, especially coming from the man who had once told me he couldn't imagine a life without me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I begged him to reconsider. I even went as far as suggesting we try an open marriage, as painful as that idea was for me, just to keep our family intact. But Adam was firm. He didn't want a temporary solution. He wanted a clean break. He wanted a divorce. I was heartbroken and blindsided. We had two small children who needed their father, and I couldn't understand how he could just walk away from them, or me. When I asked him what he thought would happen to our boys, he casually suggested I leave them with someone I trusted and take the opportunity to explore the world myself. That suggestion solidified for me that he wasn't the man I thought he was. He had completely lost touch with the responsibilities of being a parent. As devastated as I was, I realized there was no saving our marriage. I stopped fighting the divorce and accepted his terms. The divorce was straightforward. Adam didn't want any of our shared assets, and his wealthy parents covered alimony and child support. He was granted visitation rights, but he rarely used them. Even when he did, he insisted on meeting the kids at his parents' house and avoided interacting with me altogether. After a few months, he stopped visiting altogether, effectively disappearing from our lives. It wasn't until 2 months after the divorce that I learned the truth about why Adam left. My friend Rachel had heard through her cousin that Adam had joined a group of men who followed a bizarre ideology. They believed that relationships and family were unnecessary constraints and that people should remain unattached to truly live freely. Adam had been introduced to this group through a co-worker, and they had convinced him that his marriage and children were dead weight. Rachel's cousin had even bragged about how their group had converted a married man with kids, claiming it was a triumph for their ideology. When Rachel saw a photo of Adam with this group, she realized what had happened and told me immediately. The anger I felt when I learned the real reason for Adam's departure was indescribable. He hadn't left because he was unhappy or wanted to grow as a person. He had abandoned us to fit into a group of men who preached selfishness and irresponsibility. He left his wife and children behind for some childish notion of freedom. At that moment, I decided that Adam was no longer worth any of my energy. I focused on my boys and my career, determined to create a stable, loving environment for them. Over the next few years, I worked hard to provide for my kids. I hired a nanny so I could focus on my job during the day and dedicate my evenings to my boys. My parents were a huge support, and even Adam's parents stepped in occasionally, though it was clear they were ashamed of their son's actions. I poured my heart into raising my children to be kind, responsible, and loving. I wanted them to grow up to be everything their father was not. Slowly but surely, life improved. I earned promotions at work, doubled my income, and built a happy home for my boys and me. For 3 years, I didn't hear a word from Adam. I assumed he was off living the adventurous life he had left us for. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, he was traveling to exotic locations and indulging in luxuries, blowing through his money without a care in the world. Meanwhile, I stayed in the apartment we had shared, not because I couldn't afford to move, but because it was convenient and had become a comfortable home for my boys and me. Then, last Sunday, Adam showed up at my door. I was spending a quiet day at home with my kids when I heard a knock. I opened the door to find Adam standing there, holding a large bouquet of red roses and smiling with tears in his eyes. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I hadn't seen or heard from him in 3 years, and now he was standing on my doorstep as if nothing had happened. I stared at him for a moment, taking in his appearance and the ridiculous bouquet. I didn't feel emotional or nostalgic. All I felt was anger. Before he could say a word, I slammed the door in his face. He started knocking again and pleading with me to let him in. He said he had come to apologize and that he wanted his old life back. The audacity of his words stunned me. He had abandoned us without a second thought, and now he thought he could waltz back into our lives like nothing had happened? I let him speak, partly out of morbid curiosity, and partly because I wanted to hear him grovel. But as he talked, I realized he wasn't truly sorry. He was just looking for an easy way to fix the mess he had made of his life. Seeing him again reminded me of how far I had come without him. My boys and I had built a life filled with love and stability. We didn't need him, and we certainly didn't want him back. Adam returned after 3 years, showing up unannounced and launching into a lengthy, emotional explanation. He started by talking about how, despite the fun he had traveling and living freely over the past few years, he ultimately felt empty. He described the excitement of his adventures, the novelty of being away from home, and the joy of being part of his friend group. Yet, he said, when it all came down to it, he was left feeling hollow because there was no one to come home to, only empty hotel rooms. He admitted that for the past few months, he had been struggling with a sense of incompleteness. That growing emptiness had finally pushed him to make a difficult decision, to come back, apologize, and try to make amends. According to him, the initial thrill of his chosen lifestyle had worn off after just a few months. Still, he stuck with it, even as it began to feel less and less fulfilling. He said he had been too scared to return because he thought he had sacrificed too much to give it all up, believing he had to commit fully to the life he had chosen. Now, he claimed he couldn't imagine continuing that way and wanted to return to the life he had abandoned. As I listened to him talk, a wave of anger rose within me. It was infuriating to hear him justify the choices that had caused so much pain to me and the kids. His words felt insincere, like he was trying to excuse himself rather than truly take responsibility. The more he talked, the more I felt the urge to slam the door in his face. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I told him bluntly to leave and said I didn't want to see or speak to him. But Adam, being Adam, refused to accept that. He stood outside the door, continuing to ramble on and beg me to give him another chance. His persistence only made me angrier. I had things to do. I needed to prepare dinner for the kids, who were in their rooms, and his presence was a growing disruption. Finally, I hit the door in frustration and yelled that we weren't his family anymore and that he needed to leave. My words seemed to shock him into silence because I didn't hear anything from him after that. After serving dinner to the kids, I immediately called my attorney to inform her of what had happened. I wanted to ensure everything was documented, just to be safe. Then, I called my parents and told them about Adam's visit, what he had said, and how I had responded. They reassured me that I had done the right thing under the circumstances and had nothing to feel guilty about. I chose not to call Adam's parents because I didn't know how to approach the situation with them, and I figured they would hear about it from Adam anyway. Later that evening, Rachel, one of my closest friends, called me. Rachel has always been a key source of information regarding Adam, thanks to her cousin, who happens to be part of Adam's friend group. Years ago, Rachel had been the one to tell me the truth about why Adam left, and her cousin had even apologized to me for his part in influencing Adam's decision. Over time, he had become an informal informant for Rachel, keeping us updated on Adam's activities. Rachel told me her cousin had recently learned the real reason Adam had returned. Apparently, Just a few hours before showing up at my door, Adam had sent a message to his friend group. In it, he complained about feeling betrayed by them. He accused them of misleading him into thinking that their lifestyle, avoiding commitment, traveling, and living freely, was superior. He claimed this belief had influenced him to leave his family. A heated argument had followed in their group chat. Adam demanded apologies from his friends for what he saw as their role in his poor decisions. However, the friends defended themselves, pointing out that their youthful ideas about avoiding commitment had evolved over time. Many of them were now in serious relationships. One was even engaged. They argued that Adam had made his own choices and had no right to blame them for his regrets. When Rachel told me all this, I was furious. It was clear that Adam's return wasn't motivated by genuine remorse or a desire to reconnect with his family. Instead, it was about his desperation to escape his loneliness and his inability to adapt to the changes in his friend group. Any guilt I had felt for turning him away completely evaporated. Over the next few days, I decided to take legal action. I filed to terminate Adam's parental rights, believing it was the best decision for my kids' stability and well-being. While the court didn't grant full termination, they ruled that any visitation would now need to be supervised by me. This decision ensured that Adam couldn't manipulate the situation further or disrupt our lives without accountability. After the hearing, Adam tried to speak to me again. I stopped him in his tracks, telling him that I knew all about his shallow motives. I told him I was done and that he could go marry his friends if he was so desperate to fit in with them. Then, I walked away with my kids, leaving him and his parents speechless. Looking back, I feel relieved and resolute. My children deserve stability, love, and a parent they can rely on. I'll do everything in my power to protect them from further disruption. If Adam can one day prove that he is capable of being a responsible and consistent father, perhaps the arrangement can change. But as far as I'm concerned, he has no place in my life, and I'll never allow him to manipulate or hurt us again. For now, I'm focusing on raising my kids and ensuring they grow up in a secure, loving environment. That's all that matters to me.